are you tonight? So glad you're here, wanting to talk about this new show, Surviving. Well, it might be an old show now. I think we're at 5 episodes and that's it. So tonight we're chatting about that. There was many people that turned me on to Surviving Death show, and I really didn't have time. I don't sit around and watch TV as much as I'd like to. That, anyways. And then a lovely lady friend of mine shared with me um, the first episode or two, and then I joined. I joined Netflix for this. So, anyways, the first episode had me hooked, and I'm sure it did you girls as well, girls and guys. I'm sure it had you guys hooked as well because the first episode, oh my gosh, so many great ideas and so much great information regarding near death experiences. So that's what we're going to talk tonight. There was things that happened in the episode that I felt could have been expanded upon, but of course, in reference for time and like, let's not get too scientific and too crazy, but I thought this would be a great avenue for that because you guys are already involved in this and are interested in this. And like me, you might want to go a little bit deeper than just the surface, right? If you're like me, you want to know the hows and the whys and what the hells. Yeah. So anyways, feel free to chat in if you'd like. That's fine. You can ask questions. There were Roberta and Jeannie had a few questions each on the Facebook page, Immortal Peacock. So if you're tuning into that, or if you found this from the Immortal Peacock Facebook group, great. If you didn't, if you found it on the MDC page or my Facebook business page, a lot of things are happening on the Immortal Peacock page that I don't advertise to the public because that's like my little core group that are in the know. Yeah. Plus, with the new Facebook Facebook algorithms and things like that, we kind of get shuffled around a bit, right? So let's go ahead and start off. I have my own set of notes here, and I'm going to get to as many questions tonight as possible. So I would like to start out, let's just start out with square one, the orthopedic surgeon. Wasn't that amazing? 37 minutes she was dead? Seriously? Now you tell me there isn't something like a higher power going on here. Oh my gosh, that's crazy, right? There was a few things that I wanted to touch upon from her part of the story. So I've got my little notes here that I was taking while I was watching the show. And she had talked about the very first thing that she noticed was a group of spiritual beings, which she didn't know. She didn't recognize them. And then she referenced it to being like seeing a grandparent that you never knew. Well, that very well could have been, but they could also be guides. Yeah. Past life relationships. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's really cool. There was also, she said, there was an instant awareness that time stood still, or that all time was now. There was no past, there was no future, there was no present. It was just all now. That's a very common conception in the spiritualist or spiritualism belief. If you do a little research on the Akashic records. It's spelled Akashic, Akashic records, which is kind of like great big library book of you, of your soul, your past lives, your present, your future. And they're held, all the Akashic records from everyone is held in the Hall of Records, which is like a spiritual ether library, I suppose, right? So that's why when all time exists now, we can see that in the Akashic record because everything's happening simultaneously. On the other side, there is no time. Now, we might reference, okay, this was in this life or this was in that life. And we might have a remembrance of that. But when we're in heaven, it all just is. And it's a little bit kind of mind blowing, mind blowing. So yeah. Now she did mention, this is one of the most important things that I got out of that whole episode, was the fact that she had mentioned a large, expansive, domed structure. So my kids, here's the thing. I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, my husband's niece passed away suddenly. And I followed her through the ascension process. In other words, like 2 hours after she passed away, up until the time that she actually went to heaven, which was about 3 days, which is normal, which is normal. What I see from experience is probably about at least 90% of the newly deceased go to this large domed structure. So here's what it is. You know, we've all heard of purgatory, right? I suppose purgatory would be a place where I'm not in heaven yet, but then I'm also not in hell. And this is kind of like that dome structure. So my niece, Christy, she showed me that in this interim phase, in this 3 days, she is in this very dark, not dark as in evil, just like without the presence of light yet, domed structure, huge, like a football stadium, huge, probably bigger than that, but that was the reference point she gave me. And this is kind of like a holding tank until they go to the light. Now, Christy said she could see the light. If she looked up, she can see it. However, she did say that if I focus on this light, I'm kind of going to be sucked right up in there and I'm in heaven right away. And she didn't want to do that, which is most newly deceased people. A lot of times they stick around till after their funeral because I want to make sure that my stuff is okay. I want to make sure my car is okay, my house is okay, and my coin collections are okay. And then women, this is so stupid. Oh my God, look what they dressed me in, right? They want to make sure that everybody's there. Like, who's coming to my funeral and who's checking up on it's just goofy stuff, right? And of course, they want to make sure that their family are okay, of course. So this is kind of a holding tank. However, what Christy did show me, and many spirit have shown me since, is when they mentally focus on you, they're instantly with you and they can be in the room with you and the lights are on and it's just like they're here, but they have to mentally focus. And that takes practice. That takes practice. As soon as they drop their focus, they're back in this domed structure. Okay. It seems to be a simple first etheric level of the spirit world. Is God there? Of course, God's everywhere. Does that mean they're going to hell? No. Now, there are some people in the spiritual field that believe that some people are stuck in this area. Nah, you know what? When I first started developing and I first started getting involved with all that kind of stuff in the spiritualist church, that seemed to be the case. That seemed to be the consensus, that you could get stuck in here. The only spirit that I've ever noticed that I feel are permanent residents, I did not say stuck. The only spirit people that I seem to see as permanent residents are those who are alcoholics, those who are drug addicts, or those people who in life were so uber controlling that they choose to remain earthbound. Remember, I said they choose. God gives us free will. So when I used to participate in soul rescues, I can't tell you how many times I told spirit, look up, there's a freaking light up there. Look at the light. Oh yeah. So these weren't unintelligent spiritual beings. So anyways, that's the domed structure. If you have any questions about that, hurry chat in on that, and then I will get to it as soon as I can. Okay, so I don't want to be jumping all over the place tonight just because it's too confusing. All right, so if you have any questions about that dome structure, please chat in quickly. Oh, one last thing, I did want to make sure, if spirit decides to leave the dome, can they go back? I suppose they could, but why would they want to? It's very limiting. It's almost like you're closed off. You have so much more freedom in heaven, or in the world of spirit, in the once they've crossed over, right? Once they've made their ascension. Now, I did want to mention, remember I said like 95% of spirit go to that place. The others, and unfortunately, I see the numbers getting higher and greater, which is unfortunate, are suicides. Mm-hmm. Suicides. So, and also people who've passed suffering from a debilitating mental illness. Okay. Now, when I say suicides, this can be intentional or unintentional. All right. Either or, there's an aspect of mental health here. Spirit do not differentiate between physical health and mental health. They're automatically, these people, the mental health, the Alzheimer's, the schizophrenia, that kind of stuff that are off a little bit, and then suicides. What I have found is that your council, your council of elders, your angels, your guides automatically whisk you away. You don't stop at the dome, right? You don't stop in that first layer. You're taken immediately right away. Because what's happening is you may not have had a physical death to the brain. It's more of a memory. It's a consciousness. So that's why I often tell people, don't be worried if your spirit loved one hasn't contacted you right away if they passed from one of those diseases. Yeah, because sometimes it takes them a while. My mom had horrible dementia, horrible dementia, and I didn't hear from her for 6 months. And then it was like I was in the shower one day. It was like, Lisa, I'm fine, which is totally her MO. So it shocked me, but because I was in the shower, for God's sake. But yeah, so it just tells you the length of time it can take. And again, over there's no time, right? So for them, it could be a blink of an eye. It's us that has those timelines. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's see. Oh yeah, so there was question about the ambulance being there. Dun, dun, dun. Spirit can arrange that and more. So I don't believe in coincidences. I believe everything's preordained, everything's put in motion. God has us all in control, guys. There are no coincidences. Now, there was mention later on toward the end of her part of the story about her son also passing away. And the first thing, once I heard that, the first thing that popped in my head was, maybe she went through all this so that she would understand or better be able to cope with her son's passing. Because now she has foreknowledge of where he's at, right? What he's gone through, what he's going through, all that kind of stuff. So I always think that there's a little weird coincidence here. Yeah. All right. Okay, so next I want to talk about the geologist who fell down the mountain. So let me read you what I wrote. So he falls down the mountain and experiences an expansive experience. More than likely, this is the spirit beginning to leave the body, which is often the case when there will be great physical pain prior to passing. And I don't doubt it that the orthopedic surgeon happened the same. So it's quite often, way often, that if there's a trauma, physical traumatic death, we're going to pop out of our body prior to that happening. Okay. Our spirit, all right, we're still connected by the silver cord because we haven't experienced physical death yet. But if that's instantaneous and if it's supposed to be, if you're not supposed to suffer for whatever reason, you will leave your body. And I actually see this quite often if there's great physical pain prior to death, even if there's not some kind of trauma, like cancer, right? So, and it might not have anything to do with the morphine. Of course, that sometimes taking on a morphine or an opioid of some kind actually relaxes the body, physical body, enough where the spirit can float off and be at peace. Nice, right? I love that. I love that. Okay, let's see. He did mention being met by high-level spiritual beings. So, we all have spirit guides, right? There's 5 main spirit guides that we come in with, that we come into life with. We've hired these spirit guides for the things that we need to learn on this go around. There's also then a higher level called the Council of Elders, who are spiritual guides, but they're over millions and millions and millions of people, not just you. Right? So, and of course, then we have deities and whatnot. But these spiritual beings will always be there when there's a transition. Always. Granted, you might see mom and dad and grandma, grandpa, blah, blah, blah. But you're always going to have those guides. Now, as in, the surgeon, she says she didn't recognize them. So you may not either. If you haven't met your spirit guides here, you might not know them once you cross over, but you'll have that instant recognition of who they are to you, or who they were to you, because they might help you during your transition to the afterworld. But that doesn't mean that you're going to keep them throughout all your different incarnations. So you guys have any questions? Holler, holler, holler. Holler, holler, holler. All right, let's see. He also mentioned, this is the geologist, mind you. He also mentioned being absorbed into the whole, which the WHOLE, into the whole. We are a speck or a spark of the divine. So we will be reassimilated, I guess you want to call it. All right. Okay. All right. Then there was a young mother about to give birth, and she had premonitions about her passing upon giving birth. And it actually happened, right? It actually happened. So she saw this. Now, my theory on that, was that she was able to tap into the Akashic record. So she saw what was going to happen. Intuitively, she saw it. Maybe mentally, claircognizantly, she saw it, whatever, or saw it. So I don't know, however, because later on in her interview, she mentions having insight or premonition or psychic spiritual hits after the birth of this baby. She did not, however, go on to say that she was also having those prior to that, prior to getting pregnant. She didn't mention that. So I have to assume that she was intuitive anyway to begin with, but I don't know to what degree. Right? Okay, let's see. Roberta, do your ancestors stay with you through lifetimes? Usually, yeah, but maybe, and more often than not, likely, they're in the same position, right? One time you might be the mother, or you might be the father in the next time, or you might be the third or fourth cousin, or you might be an aunt or uncle or whatever. So if you've, pardon me, if you've read the books, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls by Michael Newton, which I strongly recommend, he talks about past life regressions and life between lives and stuff like that. He talks about a simple analogy being like a bunch of grapes. So if you think of a bunch of grapes hanging from your hand here, right? So there's different spiritual levels, but everyone in your bunch of grapes will have some type of soul connection to your soul. So relatives, loved ones who are friends that are very, very, very close to you, that kind of thing. So he goes into much more detail than that, but in a gist, that's what it is. So what will happen is we'll keep on reincarnating with these same people until we've gained all the information that we need from those people, right? And that's why we have so many different incarnations in different aspects of that bunch of grapes. All right, like the same core people, but maybe different roles. Yeah. I remember actually Christy's sister, Michelle, when she was a young mom, her daughter was probably about 3, and they were arguing about something. And all of a sudden, this 3-year-old little girl looks at Michelle, my niece, and goes, "You know, when I was the mother." Interesting, huh? Where would a little kid have gotten that? Okay, so Janice says, I had a premonition of my husband's death, but I didn't know it at the time. It was like a bad dream I had twice. I remembered much later. Yeah. So a lot of times, because dreams can be so elusive, dreams can be so weird, let's face it. A lot of times we don't associate things like that with reality. But if you look back at the dream like Janice has, that she had been given a heads up. However, it might not have been to the point where, okay, I have to do something about it. But then again, what can you do about it? You can forewarn them and say, you know what, stay away from the red car, which was one of my experiences. Stay away from, like, don't go to work this day or whatever. But I have to tell you, when it's your turn, it's your turn. It's your turn. Not everybody gets those 3 strikes, you're out. Some people, it just happens. Precognitive dreams like that can happen that day, like the event can happen that day, or it can happen weeks or even months down the road. More often than not, if it's a precognitive dream, it'll happen within a couple weeks. Not always, but more often than not. But I really think that you had that dream, Janice, so that you could look back at this and validate. And then also, in some way, shape, or form, it helped prepare you, or it helped get you through this hump, so to speak. Yeah. All right. So let me go. I'm going to go to the Immortal Peacock group. Let me make sure I've got everything covered that I need to have covered. How far back? This is from Roberta. Could you explain what expansions of consciousness really is? Is what we experience through meditation vividly enhanced senses and exam. Well, Roberta asks if what expansions of consciousness are, and if our daily meditations are an example of this. To this much. In our own little pea brains, we can only imagine so much. So this gives us a little tip of the iceberg, just a little tip of the iceberg. So the expansion of consciousness while you're alive, meditation. That's probably the easiest, the least expensive way to do it. Now, granted, there's plenty of teachers. I teach classes. I've got a class starting on Wednesday for inspirational writing and speaking. Then I have an 8-week mediumship class starting in April, which isn't even on my website yet. So don't get your panties all in a bundle and get all excited. Yeah. But the more you learn about everything, the more conscious you are and the more aware you are. It used to be like many, many, many years ago when I first started developing, this was like when I was in my 20s. It used to be the consensus was the less you know, the better. And they were talking about education and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm going to correct that or fine tune it and say the less you know about your client, the better. But back then it was like the less you know, the better. Because in spirit, like you don't have any foreknowledge of anything, right? And now I know, and everybody else knows that that's totally bogus. The more you know, the more spirit can pull from, right? The more spirit information that they can give you so that you can help other people as well as yourself. So meditation at this point in the game is the best and the easiest and the quickest way to do it. Start with guided meditations and then move on to free flying is what I call it. So in other words, allow spirit to direct you where they want you to be. And then learning how to interpret those signs and symbols is the trick. And that's where I come in. That's going to be covered in the mediumship course. So then Jeannie writes, can a spiritual awakening be similar to a near-death experience? The symptoms seem to be similar. I'm not quite sure what Jeannie means about this. So let's, Jeannie, can I have you type in the chat room? Can you explain that a little bit better? I think you're still here. Can I have you explain that a little bit? Because I'm not quite certain what it is that you're looking for. Let's see. So spiritual awakening is very much like the expansion of consciousness, which is meditation. You becoming more able to attune yourself, or you're more in tune with the world of spirit. Okay. It can happen during a near-death experience, but it doesn't mean it does. It doesn't mean that it automatically does. I think that's what you're talking about, Jeannie. Let me see if you've typed in. People with near-death state that they feel crazy afterwards. They're more sensitive to the clairs. Yes, okay. So in that sense, I guess you're right. As we know, anyone who's working with the clairs, which is, if you're not familiar, you should be, but clairvoyance, clairaudience, claircognizance, clairolfactance, clairgustance, clairsentience. Just a minute, she's writing stuff. Yes, they feel crazy because no one's going to understand unless they've been in those shoes. No one's going to understand that unless they've understood the lesson behind that, whether they've done it personally or experienced a near death personally, or they've studied it. It's just like coming out of the closet when you're a medium or when you're gay or whatever. People are going to look at you like you have two heads. They're going to think you're a quack. They're going to lock you up with a straitjacket. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of times this doesn't come out in public real often, right? So I know that, for instance, professional mediums, we've realized that our calling is more important than what we believe other people think about us. So a lot of times we take hits, some major hits, but it is what it is. So in essence, are they kind of alike? Yeah. A little different though. Okay. They talk about in two different dimensions at the same time. Remember, everything is all at the same time, for one. And then also remember, we have the dome. That's like one frequency. Heaven is another frequency, right? So if you think about it as like ladder rungs, all right? So we have different ladder rungs. So we have the dome, which is the first level of spirituality, first level of spirit or heaven-ish kind of. Then we have heaven. We've crossed over. We looked at the light, been sucked up through it. We're in the heaven right now. This is also where our spirit guides reside because they were always, spirit guides have always been in physical form at one point in time or another, right? So they've been in our shoes. So this is the first level. Then we have another level here where our council of elders are. They reside here, the level higher up, because they've perfected some kind of aspect to their own spirituality. Then we have the masters, which is Jesus, Buddha, Kuan Yin, Maitreya, El Morye. There's a bunch of them. And then we have God, right? There's also an angelic realm, which is kind of like just below God, right? So there's all different kinds of levels, and they all exist at the same time. You know, you might have heard me mention it or liken it to a radio station or radio, listening to the radio. So if I'm listening to 100.1, I know that on 97.5, something else is playing, but I can't hear it, but I know it's there. Heaven's pretty much the same way. It's a frequency. It's a frequency. It's a radio wave. It's energetic waves. All right. So let me see. Let me go back to the questions here. Jeannie noticed similarities between near-death experience and astral traveling. Can you expand on this? So if you guys are unaware, astral traveling is when we bring our focus, and some say our spirit or a soul leaves our body and we go like shooting around the universe and or Area 51 or to my kid's house or whatever. But you can astral travel, but it's different than remote viewing. All right, remote viewing is just putting like coordinates or a person or something like that in your mind and then kind of focusing in on that area. Astral traveling is actually leaving your body. Now, not too many people do this. It takes a lot of practice because I've seen a lot of people think they're doing it. Yeah. I suppose if you want to say astral traveling is like moving here, I guess you'd call that. You could call it that, yeah. So what I've seen is most people astral travel when they're actually channeling. So what they're doing is just kind of standing right here. And channeling is when you're able to, well, there's different levels. But if you're a trance channel, which we'll get to in a couple weeks, next week maybe, I think next week, trance channeling. So you leave your body, the spirit enters in your body, and you're kind of like la, 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 over here doing nothing. So you've actually left your body. So that's astral traveling. Now, astral traveling, you can go wherever you want to be honest with you, and you can be just in heaven, right? Now, we all are excellent astral travelers because we do that almost every night in our sleep. Keeping in mind that the world of spirit is our true home, we go there. We're there all the time. So, and very often that's why I say, oh my gosh, I'm just more or just as exhausted as when I went to bed. Probably because you weren't sleeping. And if that's the case, if it becomes chronic, then you need to ask your guides to keep you home, right? Keep you grounded in your physical body. So near-death experiences, and we already talked about that, what they are. Yes, they are very similar because near-death experience, we've left our physical body. If there is cessation of life, we're going to leave our physical body. It's automatic. And sometimes even beforehand, as we mentioned. So yes, it is pretty much the same thing. Astral traveling, however, often, not all the time, of course, like when we're sleeping, but astral traveling can be done intentionally when you're healthy. All right. The next question was, one scientist says that the brain has a filter to deal with day-to-day life. After NDE, there is no filter. Do you feel this is true for psychics and empaths? There is no filter, or maybe a small one. Here's one of those gray areas that I'm not sure I totally agree with this. I do feel like if you've had a near-death experience, you're much more open to that kind of thing. But that's not to say you weren't beforehand. You too were in that gray area. So you ever had hunches or gut instincts or whatever, you maybe just countered it, right? So the scientist said that there's a brain has a filter to deal with the day-to-day life. And I feel like, yeah, that's the case. And we're also taught, however, that we're to analyze. That's what we're taught, to use that left brain and analyze everything. A lot of times you can justify something enough so that you find a logical answer for some of the occurrences that are going on around you. However, if you're more open-minded and that barrier or that filter, so to speak, is a little bit lessened, maybe by your life experiences, it's going to come through. It's going to come through more often because you're open to it. So after near-death experience, there is no filter. That's where I have a gray area. That's why I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. I do know you're probably much more open-minded to it, but I don't know if there's no filter or not. I just don't know. Do I feel that's true for psychics and empaths? Psychics, mediums, empaths. I think either the filter is less of a barrier so that you're more open. But however, I also feel like a greater explanation for that would be the psychic, empath, medium has been born into this for one reason or another. So we have to understand that when we say filter, it's not a set, like a furnace filter, right? There's always varying degrees here. There's always varying degrees. One of the things that I see going back into near-death experience is it greatly changes your outlook on life. So you know that you're not so stuck or mired in mud, right? That came across in when the young woman was having premonitions about her own death during childbirth. Her husband obviously was very left brain, very analytical, very scientific. And usually for those type of people, this any type of paranormal, spiritual, whatever, of course they're going to chalk it off to chemical imbalances in the brain, lack of oxygen, as mentioned by that researcher. And I was talking to my daughter shortly this afternoon, who is a social worker and has a psychology degree. So she sees death all the time because she's working in a nursing home right now. And she did talk about euphoria. She talked about anxiety, things like that prior to death. But what that researcher mentioned, and it kind of struck me as interesting, was that the consensus is that it's because of the patient possibly being on an opioid or morphine or whatever prior to death, and that would give them hallucinations, or the lack of oxygen would give them hallucinations, whatever. However, then he mentioned, if you recall, that it's usually those who do not have medicated, that are not medicated, or that are medicated very little, are the ones who come back and talk about their near-death experience. So what his findings are refute what the science has dictated. And that makes sense because how many doctors, especially those that are working with death and dying, study the consciousness? Not a lot, not a lot. So I found that really interesting. The book Life After Life, thank you. Do you recommend it? Yeah, I do. However, there's some great, this is by Raymond A. Moody. You can get it on Amazon. It was written, I think, in the 70s, mid 70s, maybe. So I don't know, something like that. And it's a lot of the same type of thing. He explains near-death experiences and what his findings were at the time. And there's some case studies that he took care of, and then also some case studies that were like from years and years and years ago. And so it's a good book. Yeah, it's a good book. But would I recommend it? Yeah. If you're interested in your near-death experience, yes, I would. Yep. I had thought, actually, I was talking to my daughter today, as I mentioned, and I had thought maybe this would be a great public event between a medium and a social worker / psychology major, just like in the show today, or the first show in Surviving Death. And there was a wonderful group that they had on the show, and I thought that was what a great thing to get that together. But if this COVID ever eases up, then maybe we will do that. We'll see. At the moment when someone dies, say in a hospital, could they be someplace else at the same time, like they're home before they've died? Absolutely. Astral traveling. So remember what I said before death, many people leave their body. Usually, and that's when they start talking about seeing loved ones in the room, deceased loved ones in the room, and what have you. Usually 3 days to a week out at usually max. That's about max. And so if you're at home watching TV, kind of in a la la land, and your loved one is in the hospital, unconscious. They've left their body, and you peripherally see them in your kitchen. Like, what the hell just happened here? They astral traveled, and you saw them. Right? So does it mean that they died? No, it does not. It means that they astral traveled. So if you didn't know that, you'd say, it was just my imagination. I was thinking of her or whatever, right? No, not necessarily so. They probably just astral traveled. Their consciousness was thus that they thought of you, and so immediately they're there. It's like a thought form. As I mentioned earlier, my niece Christy, when they focus on you, when they think of you, they're immediately there with you. And keeping in mind, in our subconscious mind is where we meet spirit. So if we're watching TV here or reading a book here, and your loved one appears here, this would be the subconscious mind. So I could have sworn I saw mom here. She's not here, right? So this is subconscious and this is conscious. So as soon as you look, you're going to be wrong, or it's not going to be there. He or she, whatever, is not going to be there. But trust that it's the truth. Trust it's truth. And it doesn't mean that, they just passed away. It could. It could mean that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. Let's say there was someone who was, let's say your kid's away at college. And it's the middle of the night. And you have this weird inkling, like, doesn't it creep you out when you you think somebody's standing over your bed? Yeah. And you get this mental image or this image of your kid who should be in college. So of course you freak out. There's nothing wrong. He's just astral traveled. There you go. So hope that clears everything up, explains a little bit. I will host the next surviving death on next Monday. Same time, same channel. All right, kids, you all take care. Have a great night. And thanks for joining me. Take care. Bye, everybody.